Before superheroes covered the screens, before computer graphics became too familiar, there was a movie that made the whole world wonder how they could pull it off. That is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. What makes me always love this movie is not just the breathtaking chases or the terrifying T-1000, but the feeling that it was created by people who dared to take risks to pursue something no one had ever tried. 35 years have passed, but every time I watch it again, I still discover a small detail that makes me admire it even more. In this video, we will explore 15 behind-the-scenes secrets, unexpected accidents, and bold decisions that helped turn Terminator 2 from a blockbuster into a legend that many modern action movies are still trying to chase. E. A spectacular optical illusion. 2 Sarah Connors in the flesh. One of the moments that gave audiences the most goosebumps in Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the scene where the T-1000 suddenly disguised itself as Sarah Connor. Even today, when rewatching that segment, many people still firmly believe that it is the result of advanced computer-generated imagery ahead of its time. And it is hard to blame them, because in the early 90s, that scene truly looked like cinematic magic. But the best part is that there was almost no computer graphics in that moment at all. The secret behind that famous optical illusion is Leslie Hamilton, the real-life twin sister of Linda Hamilton. The two looked so much alike that the film crew decided to take advantage of this rare benefit to create one of the most memorable scenes in Hollywood history. In many shots, Leslie wore the costume, put on makeup, and copied every little movement of Linda almost perfectly. Combined with smart camera angles, extremely precisely calculated lighting, and the brilliant staging ability of director James Cameron, audiences were completely fooled without even realizing it. The interesting thing is that back then, Hollywood still did not rely too much on green screens or digital technology like today. Filmmakers were forced to be creative with bold manual methods. And perhaps that is why many scenes in Terminator 2 still carry a real, chilling, and weighty feeling much more than many modern films, using millions of dollars of special effects. The awkwardly funny stripping scene in real life. One of the most iconic scenes of Terminator 2 Judgment Day is the moment the T-800 appears in the bar, cold, silent, and practically shameless while wearing only a pair of leather underwear walking into the crowd. That scene later became a classic image of 90s cinema. But behind it was a behind-the-scenes situation that was both hilarious and unbelievable in real life. While the film crew was preparing to shoot the scene outside the bar, a woman accidentally walked past the area. Because the set was staged so realistically, she completely did not realize this place was shooting a Hollywood movie. In her mind, at that moment, this was simply a normal bar opening in the evening. And then she walked up right as Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared in front of her with his massive muscular body, but wearing almost nothing except the character's signature underwear. According to retellings from the crew, the woman stood frozen for a few seconds in pure shock, completely not understanding what was happening. The atmosphere then was both silent and extremely awkward until Arnold burst out laughing and quickly joked that tonight is male stripper night. The entire film crew immediately broke into laughter, and that tense moment quickly turned into an unforgettably fun memory on set. That is also a very special trait of old-school Hollywood. Behind the $100 million blockbuster movies sometimes lie such ordinary, spontaneous, and very human behind-the-scenes stories. Sen. The hot deception at the steel mill. The final scene in Terminator 2 Judgment Day at the steel mill is always considered one of the most haunting and emotional endings in cinematic history. The glowing red fire, the molten metal churning below, the heat that seems to pierce through the screen, all make the audience feel like the actors are truly standing in the middle of hell. But the interesting thing is that the truth behind that scene is completely the opposite. That famous pool of molten steel was actually not real steel. The special effects team created a special mixture from oil, water, and powdered sugar to create a consistency and reflection similar to liquid metal. And for this mixture to maintain its perfect texture in front of the camera, it had to be kept at an extremely low temperature. In other words, instead of being suffocatingly hot as the audience imagined, the set at that time was actually so cold that many actors had to shiver between takes. The funny thing is that while the whole crew was shivering from the cold, they still had to constantly spray fake sweat on the faces and bodies of the actors to create the feeling that everyone was being burned by the terrible heat from the steel mill. That is exactly the magic of old school cinema. There were no modern LED screens or hyper-realistic simulation technology like today. Everything relied on lighting, camera angles, handcrafted materials, and the incredibly bold imagination of the filmmakers. And perhaps that is why, when rewatching Terminator 2, the audience can still feel a very real weight in every frame. Because behind that layer of molten steel is an entire era of Hollywood making films with pure creativity. The chilling coincidence with a shocking event in America. There are behind-the-scenes moments of Terminator 2 Judgment Day that sound exactly like a fictional Hollywood story. But the scariest part is that this is completely true. While the film crew was shooting the famous bar scene where the Terminator character walks in amidst the cold neon lights and echoing rock music right outside the set, America was witnessing an event that would change its history forever. That night, the incident of Rodney King being brutally beaten by Los Angeles police occurred. A citizen happened to record the entire event with a personal camera, and that tape quickly became a shocking bomb across America. It ignited years of outrage over police brutality, ultimately leading to the Los Angeles riots in 1992, one of the most chaotic and painful periods in modern American history. The chilling part is that the Terminator 2 crew was filming that day right across the street, almost opposite where that historic event took place. While in front of the lens, Hollywood was creating a fictional apocalyptic scenario. In real life, a real social bomb had just been ignited. Years later, when looking back at the film, many American viewers felt there was something very strange about the atmosphere of Terminator 2. It does not just carry the tension of science fiction, but it also reflects the very real insecurity of America in the early 90s. Woo. The voice-breaking crisis of child star Edward Furlong. When rewatching Terminator 2 Judgment Day, many viewers still remember the image of John Connor with a rebellious face, a mini motorcycle, and the very signature cool kid vibe of the 90s. But behind the screen, the crew had to face an extremely headache-inducing problem: Edward Furlong's puberty. At the time he was cast as John Connor, Edward Furlong was still just a teenage boy with almost no acting experience. But because the shooting schedule lasted for 8 continuous months, his body and voice began to change too quickly. During filming, Edward grew visibly taller after just a few months. His face changed, and most seriously, his voice began to crack right at puberty. This became a nightmare for the post-production team, because in many scenes, John Connor's voice changed noticeably between different shooting days. The sound crew had to edit and reprocess a series of dialogues to keep the character sounding as stable as possible. But it did not stop there. In the final scene of the film, Edward was significantly taller than when filming began. To keep the frame ratio matching with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Linda Hamilton, the crew even had to dig a small hole for him to stand lower while shooting. It sounds funny, but that is exactly the kind of very real behind-the-scenes crisis that old Hollywood had to face. No CGI to adjust height. No AI to automatically fix voices. Only people trying to manage by any means to keep the cinematic magic from being broken. Leo. The classic role replacement due to a tragic accident. Today, it is hard to imagine anyone other than Robert Patrick becoming the T-1000. His cold face, lifeless eyes, and way of moving like a human hunting machine turned him into one of the most terrifying villains in cinematic history. But what few people know is that Robert Patrick was initially not the first choice of the film crew at all. The person director James Cameron aimed for to play this role was Billy Idol, the famous rocker with a rebellious look, platinum blonde hair, and an extremely distinct style of the 80s. Cameron believed that Billy Idol had an aura that was both cold and bizarre, very suitable for a shape-shifting machine from the future. Everything was almost prepared until the accident happened. Billy Idol got into a serious motorcycle accident that left his leg severely injured. He was forced to withdraw from the project because he could not meet the demands of the high-intensity action scenes of the film. And then the door of destiny opened for Robert Patrick. The interesting thing is that Robert Patrick's leaner physique, faster movement speed, and minimalist acting style unintentionally made the T-1000 much more terrifying compared to the original plan. No massive muscles like the T-800, but cold, silent, and like an inescapable nightmare. Sometimes in Hollywood, seemingly tragic accidents unintentionally create cinematic history. See, the occupational accident that left permanent consequences for Linda Hamilton. When mentioning Terminator 2 Judgment Day, most audiences will immediately remember the intense action scenes, the gunfire echoing across the screen, and the breathtakingly strong image of Sarah Connor. But behind those legendary cinematic moments is a very real price that actress Linda Hamilton has to carry for the rest of her life. During the tense shootout scene inside the elevator, an extremely enclosed and tight space, the crew used high-intensity gunshot sounds to create the most realistic feeling possible. Everything happened so fast. Flashing lights, screaming, the sound of metal echoing throughout the set, and amidst that chaos, Linda Hamilton accidentally forgot to wear her ear protection. The moment the gunfire erupted in that enclosed space, it not only shook the entire scene, but also caused permanent damage to her hearing. After the film, Linda Hamilton suffered partial hearing loss in one ear, an injury that could never fully heal. What makes this story more haunting is that audiences watching the film are completely unaware that behind the cold face and determined eyes of Sarah Connor on screen is an actress truly sacrificing her body for the role. And perhaps that is also why the emotions in Terminator 2 always bring an unforgettably real feeling, even after more than 30 years. Bye. The smelly truth behind the deadly sounds of the T-1000. One of the things that made the T-1000 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day so terrifying is not just his liquid metal appearance or his horrific shape-shifting abilities. It is also the bizarre sounds every time he moves, passes through iron bars, or regenerates his body after taking bullets. It is the kind of sound that is both wet and chilling, making audiences unable to forget once they hear it. But the funny thing is that behind those haunting sound effects is a room full of extremely weird-sounding items. To create the sound of the T-1000's liquid metal body sliding across surfaces, the sound team tested a variety of different materials. And finally, the thing that provided the most perfect sound was canned dog food. They turned the can upside down and recorded the sound of the squishy block of meat sliding out. That very smelly sound became an iconic part of the most terrifying villain in the film. Moreover, the sound of bullets piercing the T-1000's body was not created using modern technology either. Sound effect experts simply took a glass cup and plunged it hard into a container of yogurt to create a chilling squish sensation. That is also what made Hollywood of that era so special. Before computers did everything for humans, sound artists had to be creative with their hands, their imagination, and sometimes with the weirdest things they could find in the kitchen. And amazingly, those sounds created from dog food and yogurt contributed to making a cinematic nightmare that audiences still remember more than 30 years later. Joe, the emergency call on Christmas Eve. Even legendary films like Terminator 2 Judgment Day once almost made a huge mistake in the editing process. After almost completing the final cut, director James Cameron suddenly realized a crucial detail was missing. In the film, the T-800, after a fierce battle, lost power and then came back to life, but the audience was never clearly explained how he restarted himself. It sounds small, but Cameron understood that just one such logic hole was enough to affect the emotional flow of the movie. The problem was that at that time, the crew had almost completely wrapped up filming. Most of the sets were dismantled. Everyone was on Christmas break. But James Cameron still decided it had to be fixed at all costs. He immediately made an emergency call to Arnold Schwarzenegger and requested an additional short scene to explain the T-800 reactivating its power system. And the admirable thing is that Arnold agreed right away, even though it was the holidays. That is a very special kind of dedication of the old Hollywood era. Filmmakers did not just want to finish the movie. They wanted every detail to be truly perfect, even if it meant dragging the whole crew back to the set right on Christmas Eve. Perhaps it is that almost crazy perfectionism that helped Terminator 2 become an almost ageless blockbuster. Sure, the crazy truck roof peeling stunt that was completely unscripted. One of the things that makes Terminator 2 Judgment Day still feel breathtakingly real after more than 30 years is because many crazy moments in the film were actually shot in real life. Not CGI, not computer models. And the scene where the truck gets its roof scraped off is the most perfect example. During the intense chase sequence under the bridge, the film crew brought a large truck to the set. But as they prepared to roll the cameras, they discovered an extremely headache-inducing problem. The height of the truck was almost impossible to fit through the space beneath the bridge. Normally, many film crews would change the location or fix it with special effects. But James Cameron is not that kind of director. After a few minutes of observation, Cameron suddenly made an extremely reckless, but also very Hollywood decision. Just let the truck rush straight ahead and let the bridge peel off its roof on its own. And that is exactly what happened. As the truck rushed forward at high speed, its roof was torn apart right in front of the lens, creating a perfect moment of chaos that no one could simulate so realistically with the technology of that time. The interesting thing is that the reactions of many actors and crew members in that shot were also almost genuine. That is also the very characteristic spirit of Hollywood in the 90s. Directors did not just shoot films. They were ready to turn accidents, unplanned problems, or impulsive decisions into cinematic magic. And sometimes, the very moments that were not in the script at all become what audiences remember forever years later. Yi, a huge fortune for every spoken word, $21,000 a word. If there were an award for the least talkative but most expensive character in Hollywood history, the T-800 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day would probably win absolutely. When the film was released in 1991, Arnold Schwarzenegger received a massive salary of about $15 million, an extremely crazy number at that time. But what makes audiences today both shocked and amused is that throughout the movie of more than 2 hours, Arnold only said about 700 words. That is right. Only 700 words. If averaged out, every word that the T-800 uttered cost more than $21,000. Which means every time the killer machine opened his mouth, the producers almost heard money flying out of their accounts. And the peak is certainly the legendary line, "Hasta la vista, baby." Just 4 short words, but according to the fun calculations of fans, that sentence cost more than $85,000 in salary. Interestingly, despite having very little dialogue, Arnold still created one of the most iconic characters in American cinematic history. He did not need long monologues or complex emotions. With just a cold gaze, a signature deep voice, and a few brief lines, he turned the T-800 into a pop culture legend. And perhaps that is also a very unique magic of Hollywood's golden era. Sometimes, a well-timed phrase is even stronger than 1,000 lines of script. Sure are. The running speed beyond the limits of the villain. If Arnold Schwarzenegger brought the feeling of an invincible war machine, Robert Patrick terrified the audience in a completely different way. No noise. No giant muscles, but cold, precise, and terrifying to the point of having almost no human emotion. To transform into the T-1000 in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, Robert Patrick trained extremely rigorously. He studied the movements of predatory machines and set for himself almost non-human rules. When running, he only breathed through his nose so his body would not show signs of fatigue like a normal person. When shooting, he tried to keep his face completely emotionless, almost not blinking, not frowning, not showing any emotion. And it is this obsession in every movement that made the T-1000 one of the most memorable villains in cinematic history. But the craziest thing lies in the chase scenes. Robert Patrick ran so fast that in one famous shot, he actually outran John Connor's motorcycle. The crew was shocked because they did not expect the actor to be able to maintain such an incredible speed over many consecutive takes. Finally, instead of pushing him to run faster, the director had to ask him to slow down so the camera and the motorcycle could keep up. Perhaps that is also the reason why every time the T-1000 appears on screen, the audience always feels like he is not acting. He is like a real machine, hunting its prey, cold, tireless, and never stopping. Shisen, burning $5.5 million US just in exchange for 3.5 minutes on screen. Today, audiences are too familiar with CGI-filled movies, where an entire city can be destroyed with just a few mouse clicks on a computer. But in 1991, what Terminator 2 Judgment Day accomplished was almost unimaginable. The T-1000 character, the liquid metal villain played by Robert Patrick, became a true cinematic revolution. But to create those few brief minutes of appearance on screen, Hollywood had to pay a huge price. The CGI special effects alone for the T-1000 cost about $5.5 million, an almost crazy number in the early 90s. Not only that, 36 top visual effects artists in the world had to work continuously for 8 months to complete the transformation scenes of this character. And what astonishes everyone the most is that all that money, effort, and time only produced about 3.5 minutes of complete CGI effects in the film. 3.5 minutes. Today, it sounds short, but in 1991, that was the future of cinema being born right before the eyes of the audience. The special thing is that the film crew did not abuse technology. James Cameron only used CGI at the exact moments when it was truly necessary, and then combined it with practical, real-life effects to create maximum realism. And perhaps it is this restraint that makes the scenes of the T-1000 still more incredible today than many modern films covered in special effects from start to finish. It is not just CGI. It is the moment Hollywood stepped through the door of the future with all of its recklessness and ambition. Shazoo! An unprecedented Oscar record. For many years in Hollywood, sequels were often seen as the shadow of the first installment. Audiences preferred the original. Critics also rarely praised sequels. But then Terminator 2 Judgment Day appeared and completely broke that rule. The amazing thing is that the first Terminator film in 1984, although extremely successful and highly influential on pop culture, did not receive any Oscar nominations. Hollywood at that time still considered action science fiction as pure entertainment rather than true cinematic art. But with Terminator 2, everything changed. The film not only became a global box office phenomenon, but also left professionals amazed at what James Cameron and the crew achieved. From revolutionary CGI effects, sound design, makeup to visual effects, everything was ahead of its time. As a result, the film won 4 Oscars, an extremely rare victory for an action science fiction sequel. What is even more special is that victory felt like the moment Hollywood was forced to admit that blockbusters are not just loud explosions and big fires. They can also be art. Today, audiences are used to sequels winning big awards. But in the early 90s, Terminator 2 was truly an almost unimaginable exception. And perhaps that is why this film always feels special. It is not just a successful sequel. It is the film that raised the standards of all of Hollywood to a completely new level. Shazoo! The hidden secret of Guns N' Roses. One of the most interesting things about Terminator 2 Judgment Day is that the film is filled with small details that normal viewers almost never notice. And one of the most subtle Easter eggs is related to the legendary rock band Guns N' Roses. In the famous mall scene, the T-800 walks up to a box of roses placed on a motorcycle. Then, right after that, he pulls out a shotgun hidden inside. At first glance, this is just a very signature, cool action scene of Arnold Schwarzenegger. But in reality, James Cameron planted an extremely clever visual play there. A gun being pulled out of roses. Guns N' Roses. That was Cameron's silent tribute to the rock band dominating America at that time. And what makes this detail even more interesting is that the song You Could Be Mine by Guns N' Roses also appeared in the promotional campaign for the film, becoming an inseparable part of the Terminator. 2 memories for an entire generation. This is exactly the kind of detail that made Hollywood in the 90s special. Filmmakers did not just create movies, they created an entire atmosphere of pop culture, where music, cinema, and lifestyle blended together. And perhaps that is why more than 30 years later, just hearing a few rock guitar notes ring out, many American viewers still immediately remember the image of the T-800 wearing a black leather jacket, wearing sunglasses, and walking slowly amidst the neon lights of an era that has become legendary. Dear viewers, after more than 3 decades, Terminator 2 Judgment Day is still not just a movie to watch, but a standard to compare. The secrets, accidents, and bold decisions behind the scenes have proven that a masterpiece is not created just by a large budget, but by passion, recklessness, and the desire to overcome all limits. Perhaps that is also the reason why every time the movie returns, it still makes us thrilled like the first time. As for you, which detail in Terminator 2 surprised you the most? Please share in the comments section.